Morant with a running start. Elevates. Oh, it dunks. Oh, my goodness.
Tie game in overtime. Gasol will turn his heat. It's gone. Memphis on top. 7-10 remaining. Conley now with three. Count it. A 15-point lead for Memphis. And Blake Griffin gets into it on the floor with Randolph. Hard to tell if there are any punches being thrown under there, but Griffin took acceptance.
Adams going long. Morant. He hit it. John Morant. Insanity.
You gotta be kidding me.
Welcome to Grits and Grinds, a Memphis Grizzlies podcast. My name is Keith Parrish. On today's episode, I'm going to go over some Grizzlies news, specifically about the coaching staff, and then I'm going to look at the Grizzlies roster again and talk about some options for the needed big, whether that's the player they take in the first round or someone they trade for, or maybe someone they even sign through their limited free agent options. I'm going to look at the roster and some maybe things that we should be thinking about and some specific players. I've tried to go through the entire NBA and look at the list of specific players we're talking about who the Grizzlies might be able to acquire this offseason. Before we do all of that, just a word from Underdog Fantasy once again. Underdog has raised their opening deposit match to $250. So if you want to play fantasy sports for cash, you want to do some higher or lowers, I've been doing it a lot during the playoffs. I had a nice combination of higher Jaylen Brown points, lower on Precious Achiuwa rebounds was a moneymaker for me. So if you want to try that out and use my promo code FBBF, they will give you an opening deposit match up to $250. So if you want to try out Underdog, use that promo code or click the link in this episode's description. All right. First off, Grizzlies news. There was a report from Kelly Iko of The Athletic that the Grizzlies had let go of several assistant coaches. This came after Mark Stein reported that the Grizzlies were going to be restructuring their coaching staff. Many people, including myself, conjectured, maybe this means like Darvin Ham could join the Grizzlies coaching staff because Darvin and Taylor reportedly are very, very good friends. And of course, Darvin Ham just got fired from the Lakers. So there's this report that the Grizzlies are shaking up their coaching staff. Kelly Iko says they've let several coaches go. Meanwhile, Drew Hill, the local Grizzlies beat writer for the Daily Memphian, he says no coaches have been fired yet. So a little bit of an impasse there. In addition, Drew reports that the Grizzlies have hired a new coach, Noah LaRoche, as head of player development and as assistant coach. Now, I find one part of that super interesting. Less than a year ago, they hired Anthony Carter as director of player development and assistant coach. So does that mean that Anthony Carter is on his way out? I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean Anthony Carter was fired. One, they could coexist. Two, maybe Anthony Carter has a different job. He's going somewhere else. But if we're trying to connect dots, and now we're conjecturing, much like we conjectured about Darvin Ham, if you hired a quote-unquote head of player development and you already had a director of player development, those might clash, but who knows? As far as the longtime assistant coaches that have been here, I mean, I don't know if they move on or not, like Blake Ahern, Vitaly Potapenko, Brad Jones, Scooney Penn. Those guys have been around for a real long time. I don't know. So right now, we're kind of waiting to see what's the next domino to fall. Are some Grizzlies coaches either going to be fired, let go? Are they going to voluntarily take different positions elsewhere? I don't know. But it seems like something is certainly going on the Grizzlies coaching staff. At the very least, we know Noah LaRoche, who's a player development guy with connections to Paul George. He runs a gym or a service called Integrity Hoops, where he helps train players. So the Grizzlies hired him. He will be on the coaching staff for the upcoming year. I mean, there was some talk, chatter among me and my Patreon supporters about like, could Patrick St. Andrews be out already? I mean, I find that super unlikely just because Patrick and Taylor Jenkins are friends, and Taylor hired Patrick again last year. Also, by the way, Patrick St. Andrews is at the draft combine right now, helping coach the squads in the 5-on-5 scrimmages. So it seems super unlikely Patrick St. Andrews would be let go, but maybe one of the longer tenured coaches could be on the way out. Now, speaking of the draft combine, we're getting measurements and looks at a lot of the guys who are going to be in the draft. Maybe as far as Grizzlies news, the most notable rumor or item that came out of this was Zach Edey talking about the Grizzlies having interest in him and that he's had interest in the Grizzlies. I mean, could Edey be an option at 9? Maybe. I don't know. He's not going to be there, I don't think, at 39. But also, if you just think about like tactics from the prospect, like for Zach Edey and his camp, it benefits them to act like the team with the 9th pick has interest in them. Maybe that will embolden other teams to take him maybe higher than they thought they otherwise would. So I don't know if that means anything, but a lot of times players don't go ahead and speak outwardly about which teams they've talked to and which teams have shown interest. Normally they're a little bit more coy, but Zach Edey said that he's been talking to the Grizzlies, and maybe there's a mutual interest right there. As far as the other news, I mean, some of this is just repeated. It's stuff we already know. It's stuff we already heard from Zach Kleiman. I mean, lots of people are reporting from the lottery and from the draft combine the Grizzlies will be looking to trade their pick, possibly for win now help. I mean, I guess we've known all along. I mean, you're either going to draft a guy you think can help or you're going to trade it. You're going to do whatever you think is best for the team. So that's not really news. I do think it's interesting that there's been a lot of reports that the Washington Wizards, who have the 2nd pick, are looking to acquire another draft pick. I think as Grizzlies fans, when we hear that, our immediate thought is, offer the 9th pick for Deni Avdija. Yeah, it's a great idea. I just find it super unlikely that the Wizards would trade Deni Avdija for the 9th pick. The 9th pick, like you hope you get a Deni Avdija. By the way, Avdija was picked 9th. Like right now, Avdija, pretty solid player. He's actually on a really great contract that descends in value. He's only making around $11 million per year, 4 seasons from now. So Avdija's on a value contract. I would be super stunned if the 9th pick and matching salary could get you Avdija. That seems impossible. No, I think the Wizards probably shopping like Kyle Kuzma, open to moving some other guys, maybe further down the pecking order for them. I think Avdija's a guy they're probably going to keep around. But if not, if I'm wrong, absolutely, I would be very interested in trading the 9th pick to get Deni Avdija. He's not a center, but he can be kind of a power forward if you're playing Jaren at the 5. And again, when we take into account his salary and the Grizzlies' own salary concerns, that becomes very, very interesting. Now, looking at the Grizzlies roster, like we keep doing, now that we know they have the 9th pick, we keep thinking about like luxury tax concerns. And a lot of that is because when we think about who's the big we're going to get, what kind of big could we get on the roster, you have to account for the salary issues. Like if the Grizzlies keep Luke Kennard, that means they have 14 players. If you include the 9th pick, Luke Kennard plus the 9th pick equals 14 players under contract for next season. It also takes you right up to the first apron. It takes you into the luxury tax right up against the first apron. So if you add anybody to the squad, a 15th player, you're going to go over that first apron. You are certainly allowed to go over the first apron. But if that's the case, to get a 15th player through free agency, basically you can only sign a minimum player, or you could use the taxpayer MLE, which is around $5.2 million. And that might be enough when we think about big options to get some of these like free agents we've spoken about before. The guys who I think qualify as like a rotational big, not necessarily a starter, but like they could start for you, but maybe for $5.2 million a season or less, you could sign a guy like Goga Bitadze. I don't know what the Jalen Smith restricted free agency market would be like. That's a guy you could sign. I mean, maybe a Daniel Tice, someone like that. Not the sexiest name, but a player that would probably help the Grizzlies. When you look at the Grizzlies roster and their luxury tax concerns, this to me keeps looking like they're going to decline the option on Luke Kennard just to get them comfortably away from the first apron and actually under the luxury tax. The benefits of being out of the luxury tax is the Grizzlies then could use their full MLE. And now you could be more aggressive maybe about signing a player. Also, you could trade for a player using that full MLE. Another thing, remember the Grizzlies have the Steven Adams trade exception. And getting out of that luxury tax means you could still use that full trade exception this offseason. Also, and I'll be frank, I'm unclear about this. I tried to find the answer on the internet this morning. I couldn't find a definitive answer, but I'm pretty sure the Grizzlies can use that Steven Adams trade exception up until the next league calendar starts, because like Desmond Bane's extension doesn't kick in until next season. So before the draft or up into the draft, they could still use that traded player exception to bring in a player making like $12.5 million or less. Now, the problem would be then once the league calendar flips over, if my understanding is correct, important caveat, then you'd be way over the first apron and you'd have all these restrictions about what kind of trades you could do, about not being able to sign anybody, basically, for like you wouldn't have the MLE. You can't aggregate salaries. You can't take in more money in a trade. So like technically the Grizzlies could, I think, go way over the cap briefly. And of course you can always get out of that later on, but like that just remains another option for them to exercise. Whether or not they do that, I have no idea, but I do think, my money is on the Grizzlies declining the Luke Kennard option, or maybe decline and extend it a smaller number, but I have trouble coming up with what that number could be. Like, would Luke Kennard turn down over $14 million for the next season to sign like a 3-year, $33 million contract? Do you even want to sign Luke Kennard to a 3-year, $33 million contract? The guy has a lot of issues staying healthy. You could look maybe at some comparable salaries. It's hard to find the right match, I feel like. Like you think about Grayson Allen, who signed a massive contract to extend with the Suns, but like Grayson Allen's a better player than Luke Kennard. Grayson Allen, I think, has proven he's a more consistent player. Like he got that 4-year, $70 million deal. Grayson Allen has fewer injury concerns. Grayson Allen is a more consistent scorer. Grayson Allen has proven now for multiple years that like he can average 13, 12 points per game. He can step up and have big 17-point games way more frequently than Luke Kennard can. Luke Kennard has shown a reluctance to increase his usage. So in my opinion, I think Grayson Allen is a much more dynamic player and is a better player. I don't think their markets are that comparable. And then you look at some guys on like minimum salaries. You look at a guy like Sam Merrill for the Cavaliers. You look at a guy like Garrison Matthews for the Hawks. You think about Sam Hauser on the Celtics. Those are, like, honestly, those are comparable players to Luke Kennard. I think Luke Kennard's a little bit better, but like not a ton better. And those guys are extremely cheap. Now, what are their next contracts going to look like? I don't know. But I also think with the prevalence of shooting in today's NBA, you might be able to replace a Luke Kennard for way cheaper. I mean, even think about like what's Buddy Hield's next contract going to be? I mean, I don't think Buddy Hield's going to make $15 million a year. So like Luke Kennard, maybe he would accept like 3-year 36, 3-year 33, and those like a few $1 million a year savings would certainly help the Grizzlies get under that first apron if they keep him around. But again, my money is on them actually not keeping him around, or possibly maybe you trade him. And I think when we look at the Grizzlies' options to get that center, trade to me remains the most likely option. And this might not be a blockbuster trade. When I look at the 14 players under contract, John Morant, Desmond Bane, Marcus Smart, Jaren Jackson Jr., and then Vince Williams Jr., Gigi Jackson, Santi Aldama, Brandon Clark, Derrick Rose, John Conchar, Zaire Williams, Jake LaRavia, and then let's count the 9th pick, and let's include Luke Kennard. When we look at all those guys, You have, again, in my mind, a glaring hole in the front court. Brandon Clark says he wants to come off the bench. If you're fully healthy, you can certainly get through a game with just Jaren, Brandon, and Santi, but you still need a big. Zach Kleiman said we need a big. We all agree. Let's get another big in here. You're either basically, again, signing somebody, if you're lucky, for the taxpayer MLE, or more than likely a minimum if you don't make a trade. But I think a trade like where the matching salary is either Zaire or John Conchar or even Luke Kennard makes a ton of sense. The names that now, like, I've tried to put together to think about like what this like a certain trade could be. Again, they're not that sexy because I feel like as fans we keep imagining replacing Steven Adams and or getting a player better than Steven Adams. Like, I'm talking a high-level starter. The odds of getting a high-level starter, they are remote. One of the big issues is, like, what are you going to trade for that? And again, what's that player going to cost? And you have your salary tax concerns. But also the big issue is high-level starters are hard to get because the other teams that have them like them. They like having good players. Getting good players extremely hard. I have two what I would consider high-level starters that like are worth mentioning. And these would probably, of course, require like picks to acquire them. They are Jarrett Allen, who's in the news right now because the Cavaliers just lost. The Cavaliers got eliminated by the Celtics. There's all kinds of reports coming out of Cleveland about they're probably going to move on from JB Bickerstaff. They're going to have to pick. They're going to have to pick between Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. And there's some reports, some of the beat writers are saying Jarrett Allen has played his last game for the Cavaliers. Jarrett Allen is a fantastic center. Jarrett Allen has 2 years and $40 million left on his contract, which, let's be real, that's good. That's not that expensive for an all-star center. A trade for the Grizzlies of the 9th pick and Marcus Smart for Jarrett Allen is interesting and possibly fair for both parties. The reasons why you wouldn't trade for Jarrett Allen. Maybe you believe that Marcus Smart is a better fit overall. It's harder to get wings who can dribble and shoot and defend like Marcus Smart than it is to find a big usually. But like Jarrett Allen is a proven all-star. The issues roster-wise, as far as a fit on the Grizzlies, is you're still probably looking maybe for a better floor spacer, and ideally you would like a switchable big. But Jarrett Allen would make this team a lot better. Would it work? The big question we always ask ourselves, would it work in the playoffs? Would you be able to win multiple rounds to get out of the West with Jarrett Allen as a big alongside Ja? I mean, that is a fair question. The limiting factor for so many personnel decisions for the Grizzlies is the fact that Ja Morant, the best player, isn't a good shooter. And I don't want to get too overly concerned with fit because like we've seen that Ja can still lead the NBA in paint points while Steven Adams is here, a non-spacer. Like I said last episode, just having a screener and a great rebounder actually will help your three-point percentage go up because your players will get open. Also, having a lob threat for Ja, I think it's a great option to have. I think the 9th pick plus Marcus Smart makes sense for the Grizzlies as far as a trade package to offer for Jarrett Allen. Does it make sense for the Cavaliers to bring in Marcus Smart? Probably not, while they still have Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. If one of those guys moves on, then I think you could probably get somewhere. Could you match the salary without including Marcus Smart? This is obviously would make the Grizzlies much better. If you can keep Marcus Smart, like would you pick up the Luke Kennard option and then include Zaire and or John Conchar? I think if you did that, you'd have to include multiple picks. This year's 9th pick and then a future first-round pick. What do the Cavaliers want with Luke Kennard when they have Sam Merrill? Absolutely nothing. I find that to be a difficult proposition for the Cavaliers to accept, but maybe if they just focused on getting 2 first-round picks, that would be enough for them. That is extremely interesting. And whenever a team is moving on from a big center and we have this gaping hole at center, I feel like that's something I would certainly consider. And again, I'm not going to get too hung up on the idea of like, oh, Jarrett Allen is only a drop coverage big, and I'm not sure we can win a postseason series. I feel like you might not be able to get a better option at center. That's what I come back to a lot. And usually when I'm talking about like, is this going to work in the playoffs? I feel like sometimes we get over obsessed with that idea because one, the regular season also super important. You have to get to the playoffs. And like, I think when we think about that question, that usually has to do with like, what's the acquisition price going to be? It's a fair question to ask if you're going to include your first round pick this year, if you're going to include your first round pick plus another pick. It's not a question I care that much about when we talk about like worse players than Jarrett Allen. Like my example would be, I threw out Clint Capella last episode because the Hawks, they got the first pick. Maybe they'll draft Alex Sarr. If you have Sarr and a Okongwu, what do they want with Clint Capella on an expiring salary? Well, I'd be interested. I'd be open to Clint Capella coming to the Grizzlies if you could make the salary matching work. Somebody commented on the last episode, Clint Capella's bad, or Clint Capella stinks. I disagree, but like Clint Capella, not a good fit necessarily on the Grizzlies. Not ideal. Never going to make an all-star game. He can't switch. He's not going to space the court. His hands are kind of bad. He's got diminishing athleticism. However, I don't care about any of that stuff because Clint Capella is way better than anybody else we have to play center. I don't care that much about the fit when we're talking about Clint Capella or other players if it just makes the team better and if the acquisition price doesn't make me use up a precious asset. Like, if I can just get a better player, bring me a better player. Like, that totally works for me. I think starting Clint Capella, having Clint Capella start alongside Jaren, be a lob finisher for Ja, grab some rebounds, protect the rim, play 20, 25 minutes. That makes the Grizzlies awesome because the Grizzlies are in a very good position with the rest of the roster. And even when you look at the front court, we're probably closing most games with Jaren and Brandon. That's the dream. If you've listened to Grits and Grinds in previous years, I'm obsessed with Brandon Clark. I think he's a great basketball player. So like when I mention some of these names that I'll run through in just a second, like you could say, well, Brandon Clark's better than that player. Well, yeah, okay. We can close with Brandon Clark. We just need another big. We need somebody better than Santi Aldama. And I think like Clint Capella, he fits that mold. What would it take to get Clint Capella? Like that's where you get the problem. Like you could pick up the option on Luke Kennard and include Zaire Williams. Luke Kennard, Zaire Williams in like 2 seconds for Clint Capella. I'd think long and hard about that because I think it makes the Grizzlies way better. Would it help them beat the Nuggets? Probably not. Would it help them win the NBA title? Probably not. But to win the NBA title, if I can keep the 9th pick and still get Clint Capella, to win the NBA title, I think we have to get super lucky with the 9th pick turning into a really great player, with Gigi Jackson becoming a really great player, with like Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson Jr. all playing at the peak of their powers. I mean, when we talk about a parade down Beal for the Grizzlies, the path to that is Gigi Jackson getting absurdly good and then getting lucky somewhere else. Finding, a Nikola Jokic in the second round. Not even Nikola Jokic. Just finding a Jalen Brunson. Finding a Giannis Antetokounmpo. Like, that's the path for everyone, basically, to win an NBA title. I do think the question for the Grizzlies, as far as keeping the 9th pick or trading the 9th pick, the question for me becomes difficult, and I haven't come up with my answer yet, is what is the more likely path, like, to a title or to making the Western Conference Finals? Is it, for example, to mention another name, I don't think this guy's a high-level starter, but like I think he could start for you. It's a guy I talk about a lot. Another Hawks players, Onyeka Okongwu. Would you trade the 9th pick for Onyeka Okongwu? Is your path to winning the title, is it more likely that Okongwu playing 65 games for you, playing 24 minutes a game, he can get you into the second round of the playoffs. He can elevate your regular season. He could possibly be your closing big. He might be a perfect fit alongside Jaren. He could be your 5th best starter. We're not talking about a guy making an all-star game. We're talking about someone who can complement Ja, Desmond, and Jaren. Is trading the 9th pick for a guy who has maybe a sub all-star ceiling, whose ceiling is just like pretty good starter. Is that a better path towards the title? Knowing you already have Gigi Jackson as maybe this upside hope. Is that a better path to the title? Or is keeping the 9th pick, where you have maybe a 10% chance at developing a game-changing guy on a rookie deal, is that the better option towards the title? What's more likely? I again, don't know the answer. Part of me kind of thinks, all right, let's say we got lucky with Gigi. Maybe we got lucky with Vince Williams Jr. We also, by the way, got lucky with Ja, Desmond, and Jaren. Maybe let's stop trying to get lucky with if it's a 10 to 15 or 5% chance, or maybe you're super confident in your drafting abilities. You say you have a 20% chance at finding, the next Sean Marion at the 9th pick. If you think that's the better path to go, then you wouldn't trade like the 9th pick for someone like Onyeka Okongwu. But I think the Jarrett Allen question, super interesting. I think about just acquiring a guy who's more of like a middling starter level guy, like Clint Capella, if you can make the salaries match. I think that also, again, that greatly improves how good the Grizzlies can be. Just because the minutes you're taking right now, you're taking Santi Aldama minutes and Trey Jemison minutes. You got to get a center. So I think the team would get a lot better if you found a guy like Isaiah Stewart, who isn't that good. I agree with you. Not that good, but better than our players. Looking at the players who might be available, the other high-level starter, and again, this is debatable. Is this a high-level starter or is this an average starter? The other guy who might be available, I think, is Ivica Zubac. Zubac is somewhat akin in my mind to Steven Adams. He's a worse Steven Adams. I think Zubac, not a spacer, but an elite screener, an elite rebounder, and a very good, efficient finisher in the paint would be a great option. What are the Clippers doing currently? What would it take to get Zubac from the Clippers? I think it's a fair question to ask. Could a protected first get Zubac? He also is going to be on an expiring deal this year. Maybe it could be less to acquire Zubac. The other guys that we've mentioned before that I'm going to now run through basically all these names that I've come up with. The other guys we mentioned before, again, Okongwu. Would you trade the 9th pick, or what would you trade for Okongwu? Is he even available? A lot of these guys, they're not necessarily available, but I think you're going to check in to find out if they are available. That's where your Wendell Carter Jr. comes in. Wendell Carter Jr., not a high-level starter by any stretch of the imagination. What could you get? What could you send to maybe bring him in? Would you trade the 9th pick and Zaire and John Conchar for the 18th pick in Wendell Carter Jr.? I don't know. Would the Magic accept that? They might. I think it's a fair offer. Another guy I haven't mentioned that much who I would be interested in trading for is Kevon Looney. The Warriors might be in salary cutting mode. You could trade Kevon Looney, or you could trade for Kevon Looney, take him in to that Steven Adams trade exception. The Warriors could just dump his salary to you. Then, of course, you'd need to move to dump some salary after that to avoid, the first and second apron. But you could trade for Kevon Looney. That wouldn't cost you first round picks. Maybe they would salary dump him. Maybe you could just send some second rounders. Maybe they'd have an interest in Zaire Williams or John Conchar. That would save a little bit of money for them. But Kevon Looney, I think, is an interesting trade option. As far as that, as far as starter level guys, I think Jarrett Allen, Ivica Zubac, Okongwu, Wendell Carter Jr., Kevon Looney, those are the guys you're going to look at. If you want guys who aren't traditional centers, I keep in mind our old friend Kyle Anderson. I know Kyle Anderson is a polarizing player. I think bringing Kyle Anderson back into this front court would make the Grizzlies awesome. I am very biased. I am one of the founding members of Kafka, the known advocates for Kyle Anderson. I think Kyle Anderson starting alongside Jaren, that works amazing. I think Brandon Clark still could close most games. You're a little bit undersized, but a front court rotation of Jaren, Brandon, Kyle Anderson, and Santi Aldama is extremely, extremely good. The good part about Kyle Anderson, unrestricted free agent. Honestly, you might be able to get him for that taxpayer MLE. You could also look into like Obi Toppin. Again, not a real center. He's going to be a restricted free agent. Maybe, again, this is not, these are not traditional bigs or they're more power forwards. You think about like Najee Marshall. You think about like Haywood Highsmith. Like those guys are going to be available. As far as other bigs, if we go just to the rotation big. So like these are guys who you would not want to start for you. Or like maybe you would, but you're not depending on them to close games. This is where I include Gogo Batadze, who's an unrestricted free agent. I include Jalen Smith, who's a restricted free agent. You could include like Andre Drummond, who's a free agent, like Mike Muscala, Daniel Tice. These are not sexy names. I would also include in this list, as you make your Grizzlies free agent shopping list, you put it together, I would also add to it, like, again, names to think about. Like, we're talking about Luke Cornett. We're talking about Bol Bol. We're talking about Xavier Tillman. I mean, the goal to me, a rotation big, is someone who's at least as good as Xavier Tillman, hopefully better. But, like, you might find yourself in a situation where it's like, there's no one actually better than Xavier Tillman. I mean, some of you guys will be maybe interested in, like, James Wiseman, who's a restricted free agent. I'm not really. I mean, this also is where maybe you could trade for like a Nick Richards. You could try and trade for Isaiah Jackson from the Pacers. But again, these are the names we're talking about. I've basically come up with 3 categories of names. I've started writing them down. If you have other ideas, if you have other names that I should include in this list, this is guys who I think might be available for trade or they are free agents. I'm talking about just rotation bigs, guys who play in your top 8 or 9. You could even D&P them based on this matchup. But this is like your Batadze, Jalen Smith, Andre Drummond, Mike Muscala, Keita Bates-Diop, who's not really a center, like Nick Richards, Daniel Tice, Precious Achua. You can include him as like a power forward who can kind of be a big. Bol Bol, Luke Cornett, Dario Saric, Alex Lynn, Mason Plumlee. How low do you want to go? And then when I look at like a little bit better, guys who you don't mind if they start for you, the names I had were Okongwu, Wendell Carter Jr., Kevon Looney. I mean, Nick Claxton can be in here. Nick Claxton is an unrestricted free agent. Again, we go to the fit thing. Not a great fit, but what's the acquisition cost? What if Nick Claxton says, I want to play with Ja Morant? We've been over this before. Maybe you work out just a straight up sign and trade where you don't include first round picks. In that situation, I'm kind of down with it. Like, would you trade Marcus Smart for Nick Claxton? Straight up. I think the Nets might do that. Like if Nick Claxton signs for less than $20 million a year. All right, I think it's a bad rebounding fit for the Grizzlies. It's not ideal. But again, Nick Claxton is a better big than what we have. And I think a big is more important than maybe Marcus Smart. I don't know. I think that's controversial. Like, that's the only situation I think where it would make sense or it'd be possible to bring like a Nick Claxton. The other names here, I mean, like I saw someone mention Kelly Olynyk. Like the Raptors just traded for Kelly Olynyk and then extended him. I think Kelly Olynyk is a fine player. Good offensive player, of course. Terrible defensive player. But like, I'd love having Kelly Olynyk in the rotation over Santi Aldama. Kelly Olynyk, a lot better player than Santi Aldama. Also, here's where you might think about Jonas Valanciunas. Would you go back to Jonas Valanciunas? I mean, I feel like it would be hard for the Grizzlies to do that. But if we're talking about having nothing or Jonas Valanciunas, having Jonas Valanciunas on your bench, I think would make you definitely a better regular season team. And there's value to that. But those are just the names I came up with. Of course, maybe I left some out. Who knows? But the big takeaways are it's going to be hard to find the replacement players that you need. And just getting a guy who fits in your top 8, who's a big, it's going to elevate your team a lot. Like, I wouldn't be super upset about, honestly, any of the names I mentioned. Just because, like, you got to have somebody. Ideally, I think we're moving on from one of the guys back into the roster who makes a little bit more money. And that, of course, is John Conchar or Zaire Williams or maybe even Luke Kennard if Luke Kennard sticks around. And then you can swap one of those guys for maybe one of the better options that I mentioned, if it is Zubac or if it is Okongwu or Wendell Carter Jr. But I don't know how likely those trades are. And in my mind, you can't really do nothing. You have to get a big. I mean, of course, you have the whole regular season to make it happen. So, like, you could survive, I guess, for a while with Jaren, with Brandon, with Santi. But the focus this year, the goal this year is to get those bigs. And hopefully I gave you some idea about what one of those deals could possibly look like. Or, of course, they can just draft Zach Edey with the 9th pick. Or Yves Missy. Or Kyle Filipowski or whoever else these bigs are in the upcoming draft. Anyways, let me know in the comments what you guys think, which players you think I either misclassified or I omitted and I should have included. If you want to support this show, do that at patreon.com/fastbreakbreakfast. We had a vigorous discussion in the Grits and Grinds Slack channel about Kyle Anderson's efficacy just yesterday. I remain a disciple of the man who is, I believe, 19th in wins in the NBA over the last 3 seasons. Anyways, thanks you guys for listening. I'll talk to you soon. Go Grizz.